So today, this is a brown bag slash tech talk, and our special speaker today is Indy Young, and I'll read her bio real quick. Indy's work spans a number of decades, from the mid-'80s when the desktop metaphor was replacing command line and menu-based systems, to the mid-'90s when the web first toddled onto the scene, to now when designers are intent on crafting good experiences. After 10 years of consulting, Indy helped found Adapted Path with 6 other partners, all hoping to spread good design around the world, making things easier for people everywhere. Indy's mental models have helped both startups and large corporations discover and support customer behaviors they didn't think to explore at first. She has recently written a book about the mental model method, Mental Models, aligning design strategy with human behavior, published by Rosenfield Media. So her title of her presentation is Digging Beyond User Preferences, and afterwards she'll be joining us for lunch. Just stick around if you want to continue discussion or have lunch. Yeah, so thank you and welcome.
Okay, am I on? Ah, there I am. Yeah, digging is something I think Tully might respect. I like to garden a lot. This dog might want to help me out a little. I don't know. Anyway, thanks you guys for having me here. And I wanted to talk a little bit about mental models, but I'm not really going to get into them until about halfway through the presentation. I'm going to start with lots of gratuitous pictures of gardens, since I love them. Pretty roses. I just went to London, and this is from a garden called Sissinghurst. Does anybody know London gardens? Nope. Anyway, I want to talk about 2 things today. Basically, the first one is expanding your perspective. And the second thing that I want to talk about is kind of letting go of the typical marketing research that you tend to get. Now, I don't know specifically what kind of marketing research you get, but I do know what a lot of my clients end up having to deal with. And face it, statements like this, 11% of moviegoers go to movies alone, are really kind of hard to translate into software decisions. They're really kind of hard to translate into anything workable, anything that you can actually sink your teeth into. So what I bring to you today is something a little bit more in-depth. This is my friend Katie Kelly, and I asked her, why do you go to movies alone? And she told me it's because she likes to give the director her attention, her complete attention, because when she was in college, she actually wrote a play, and apparently half the people in the audience weren't paying attention during the execution of the play, and they didn't get the point, and she was really disappointed. This was something that rankled her for a long time. But if I had just asked her, do you like going to the movies alone? And she said, yeah, I like going to movies alone. That's not really going to get at the underlying reasons why she's got this behavior. So that's what I want to talk about. To kind of demonstrate the truth of talking to people, I want to step outside of the software domain for a little bit and talk about Frank Gehry. He's an architect. You guys, have anybody been down to the Disney Concert Hall in LA yet? When? What do you think?
It's absolutely stunning.
Absolutely stunning. I'll ask you why in a second. Well, actually, tell me why, in like a word.
Well, it's disobeying all the rules of the way a concert hall should be made.
Okay. Disobeying rules.
Curved walls. Places where you can't see anything but you can hear it.
Oh, interesting. Places where you can't see things but you can hear it. Things like that.
Stunning central piece, which is the pipe organ.
Oh, and the pipe organ is stunning. Oh, excellent. I haven't been yet, so this is good. Anyway, Frank is obviously, he's an architect. He is not a conductor. He's not a musician. Well, I don't know. Maybe he is a bit of a musician. I don't know him personally. But what he does at the start of this particular project, when he was asked to do this, was talk to conductors and talk to them about music and talk to them about the sound that they want to hear and the sound that they want to generate. They have this vision, this creative vision for how they're going to produce a particular symphony. And they say sometimes it has to be like candlelight, really soft. Makes you, sort of takes your breath away. And sometimes it has to be boisterous and energetic and get your heart beating and all of that. And it needs to be able to slide between these different ways of experiencing music very easily. And so he says once he had all of that, once he had talked to everybody, he could free associate. But he thought of himself as being programmed like a computer. He couldn't go wrong because he knew the language really well of music. He got into their role, and he got to understand what it's like to be a conductor. And that's exactly what I like to do with software, because I'm usually not the person intended to use the software. This here is Pat Smith. Made-up name, right? She's an entrepreneur. There's a lot of these people out here, really, really energetic, and they have this great idea. This is borrowed from Mint. Sorry, Mint. And they want to sell it to everybody. My audience is everyone. Everyone is going to use this thing that I call an online money tracker. But once they get it out there, they're really disappointed because half these people get scared and walk away, and the other people get confused and kind of fade away. And what happens is they're left with a lot less of an audience or a market than they expected. They get confused and they start doing this little design spiral. Well, what did we do wrong? How do we fix it? How do we make sure that this is working for people? And they start trying to solve problems that maybe weren't their problems in the very beginning. Maybe in the very beginning what they should have done was kind of studied these different segments of people and understand them a little more deeply. For example, maybe the green folks, they're really interested about figuring out how to save for a house and making sacrifices, and how do I actually do that and still get to go see the movies with my friends? How does this all work? The yellow people, they're maybe just so overwhelmed they don't have time at all to look at finances, and they're just like, okay, whatever, that will fix itself. I don't even want to look. The red people, maybe they realize they don't have an expertise, or they feel uneducated about financial systems, and they just want somebody to help them. It's a completely different mindset than those people in green. And then in blue, this is really what Pat Smith's audience is. These are the people who figure that they're kind of on the right path, they kind of get it, and they kind of want to see how they're doing compared to other people like them. So there's different philosophies running around here. And if you actually focus in on one or two of these, we could look at representing their beliefs and their philosophies in a model sort of a way, and look at the similarities you can see between, say, green and blue. A little bit of blue's model shows up in green's model. Does that mean that we can understand a little bit of green if we just study blue, first off the bat? A little bit of green's shows up in red. And does that mean we're going to understand a little bit of that audience? Or does this mean that we can get an understanding of whether we need to make a different application, say like a person doing financial counseling, or a completely different product for these kinds of people, as opposed to the thing that I originally had in mind as an entrepreneur when I was starting out? So this is just giving you clarity of vision. It's like, yeah, I'm going to study these kinds of people, the blues and the greens. They're the people that I'm most after based on my original idea. And I'm going to acknowledge that maybe it's a different product, or even not even a software product at all, that will address the needs of these other people. So designing software, a lot of the time out in the startup world, is a bit like playing pin the tail on the donkey. How many people did not ever play pin the tail on the donkey as a kid? Okay, there was one. There's two. You still know what the game is, though. No? Okay, we'll go through the game. You put a blindfold on somebody and you spin them around so they're all dizzy, and then you kind of shove them off in a direction, sometimes, if you're really evil, in the opposite direction of where the donkey is pasted up on the wall. And in their hand, they have this little tail with a pin in it, and they have to figure their way to the donkey and push the tail into where they think the tail belongs on the donkey while they're blindfolded. And this is what happens. So the reason why I'm saying the pin the tail on the donkey example is that a lot of entrepreneurs will just sort of start pinning stuff up there and just hope that it works, and then enter our design and our test loop, our cycle, and just cycle around, like, say, one of those tails. Well, how do we get it closer to the right place? How do we get it closer to what we want it to do? And gosh, it's going to be a lot of effort just to move it a couple of inches in the right direction. A lot of wasted resources doing that. What if we could pin that tail on the donkey a little bit closer to the right end, right from the start? This I borrowed from Jeff Veen. He used to be here. He used to be my partner at Adaptive Path, actually. And I love this graph because it talks about a word, talking, that isn't necessarily something that you recognize as a part of a software development methodology, right? Talking is just, chatting, we're talking. Let's go through ideas. Let's talk amongst ourselves. Let's talk with our end users. Let's talk with our business folks who need to get something out of this specific. And in the very beginning, let's say along the bottom of this, you've got the beginning of a product, all the way through the project to launch. In the beginning, the cost of talking is really cheap, and the cost of changing your mind is really cheap. But as you go towards launch, if you talk a little bit about something and you discover something halfway through, it's like, oh, I wanted to change that. Wait a minute, we had the wrong idea at first. It's going to cost you a lot more to go back and change that code base. It's going to cost you a lot more to go back and maybe redesign what you're doing. So this is a good demonstration of why it makes sense to talk to folks up front before the design gets too far. You probably all know that. This is a chart that I like to show because it helps people understand the differences in the kinds of research we do. And this is probably stuff you already know, but there's basically 3 kinds of research. We've got preference research, evaluative research, and generative research. And it sounds like there's a thunderstorm approaching. Preference research is really stuff you see a lot in the media. So they'll say, what do you like? You'll get votes and things like that. So many people online poll voted for this kind of a thing to happen or whatever. And you'll see it a lot in businesses. The most useful place for it is for focus group testing, is for branding and figuring out, based on an artifact, is this going in the right direction? Are we getting the right kind of idea here? And so we're asking people their opinion of this idea. Do you like it? Do you not like it? That's basically all it is. Evaluative, again, works with an artifact. It evaluates how well that artifact is fulfilling its promise. How well is it supporting that person trying to get something done? And generative research is all about helping you think up new ideas. It's about understanding the bigger picture and where are the places. Let's figure out how big the sandbox is before we start playing in it, and what are the toys that we can play with in it. And that is where you're going to get more information when you do this kind of research that will support things for interaction design or understanding where you want to take a product or not take a product. I actually just finished working with a company down in San Diego where we decided, based on the generative research we did, that we didn't want to make the product. It wouldn't solve the bigger problem that people were facing. The bigger problem that people were facing was a completely different thing, and we could see that after we did the research. But before the research, we were told by upper management that we will make a product to do X because all our competitors have a product that does X. Anyway, so we're in the process of convincing them that we really don't want to waste our money doing that. So I want to talk a little bit about this idea of segmentation, the green people, the red people, the blue people, the yellow people. How is it that I go about doing this? And how is it different than personas? Do you guys use personas here? Raise your hand if you use personas. We've got a few, some people shaking. Yeah. There's all this gray fog around personas right now. Personas tend to be used for evaluative research. I want to use them for generative research. But to use them for generative research, we've got to make them more, kind of take them back to a little more, I don't know, pure might not be the right word, but a little bit more of their roots. Yes, question already.
In traditional user experience research, or at least the way I always thought, was that you do generative research to come up with personas in the first place, right? Which you can then use to evaluate stuff on them, right?
Yes, that's the right way to do it.
You can't build a persona unless you actually go out and talk with people and sit with them and stuff like that. So I'm a bit, when you say it's like I want to use them for generative research, like don't you need to do it in the first place to do it?
Yeah, chicken and the egg.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
You've got it, and Well, I'll let you hang on to that. I'll let Tina deal with that guy. Essentially, yes, you want to use generative research to create your personas, but you have to start somewhere by recruiting some people to talk to find out, and so you make a hypothesis. And so what I'm going to talk about are hypotheses. The whole people are using personas for evaluative research is once they've got them, they tend not to create them correctly. I'm going to show you some examples of that. And they tend not to use them in as broad a way as I want to see them used, simply. So an audience segment is the way I refer to a persona. If you added a name and a photo, then you'd get a persona. And here's an example of one from one of my clients, Wanda Wellness. And you can read a little bit about her. She's like, 3 out of 5 happy faces for computer savvy. Web savvy, she's 4 out of 5 happy faces. Her info seeker style is action-oriented with purposeful strikes. And on. She's a female, she's married, she went to college, and she's a teacher. And what I want to talk about is that does this information, the big question is, does this information affect her behavior, her beliefs, her reactions within the scope of what you're studying? So if, for example, this person were studying choices people make around healthcare, is her computer savviness or web savviness really going to dictate her behavior as to how she decides on a doctor or how she decides to have a procedure or not to have a procedure? No, doesn't affect it. Likewise, most of the rest of the demographic stuff doesn't affect it. You need to layer that stuff on just to make a persona interesting. The other thing that you'll see is long descriptions of these people where only the stuff highlighted is the stuff that really affects the way that someone makes their decisions. It's only the stuff that reflects their reactions, it reflects kind of their underlying philosophies. And in this particular one, we had this little table here where we were talking about user characteristics and design possibilities, and all of these are fabulous. If you look at that right-hand column with design possibilities, every one of those things sounds really interesting, and I don't think I wouldn't do any of those things for anybody else. There's not a segment out there that I wouldn't want to, say, make it easy to find something specific. I wouldn't want to make it hard for a particular person. So anyway, a lot of that stuff that's wrapped up in poorly designed personas can be unwrapped and can be taken back to its behavioral, kind of like the underlying, why are you doing this? And let's just focus on what's going to affect how you navigate this space that I'm exploring. So, for example, the healthcare choices. One thing that I do when I start off, so I start off with a hypothesis. That was a perfect timing for your question. Start off with a hypothesis. So that I can figure out who to talk to, then I go and talk to them, and then I change my hypotheses. And you will see that in a minute. But when I start off, I want to make sure that I'm not looking at it from a demographic point of view. Most companies that I go and consult for are looking at it from a demographic point of view. They have tons of data on their people. I worked for one client that had 40 different variables that they tracked about every single person that they were interested in. And they're like, oh, how do we deal with 42 different variables? How could we study all of that? I mean, the permutations there alone would take us 5 years to go and talk to each of these people. So what I do is I try to pull people back from the demographics, from the web savviness, and talk to them about, well, what are the behaviors? So for example, I did a moviegoer mental model. I did this just so I'd have an example to show that I could really talk about so that my clients wouldn't go, no, you can't talk about my stuff. And I wanted to explore kind of who these audience segments were. And among talking to people who go to movies a lot, there was a personality type or a behavior type where once they saw the movie, they got really excited about it and they wanted to tell their friends. And they'd either write email or they'd write a review or they'd chat with their friends during lunch or whatever. Oh, you got to go see the movie. Really, it's because such and such did this. And don't forget to see the little reference to that other movie that we saw together in the middle. And they'll talk about all the scenes and they'll talk about the craft of the movie and things. Do anybody in the audience, do you guys do this? One person does. Yes, good. So we've got a little demographic here, right? Are you under 30 or over 30? He refuses to say. Okay, we'll say under 30. And so you start thinking about it. Okay, yeah, all these people are like under 30, and they're kind of like me, and they have these behaviors that, along with it come certain philosophies and maybe certain genres that I look at in terms of movies and things like that. In my little example, I said 17-year-old guy. There's also the 70-year-old. There are film critics who work for large newspapers, females in their 70s who are writing film reviews, who belong to the same group. Same behavior. They've got the same philosophy. I need to tell these people to see this movie or to avoid this movie and not waste your time on it. So when I created my hypotheses, this is what I came up with. I came up with something called a social moviegoer, someone who loves to go to movies because of the company that they're going with, because of the talking before or after or during the movie. I came up with another group that is what I call a movie buff. They like to, they'll do anything to get to the movie. They'll make a sacrifice. They'll stand in line to get tickets. They'll make sure that they have really good seats. They're just really excited to get into the movie and make the experience the best thing that they can get. And then I made up something called a big fan. And that's a person who gets the models and the action figures afterwards, and maybe the DVD if they're a little older. I have a cousin who's my age, and he buys all the action figures, so I can't say demographics there. But anyway, this is sort of the person who makes that movie-going experience extend into their own lives. There's the film purist, kind of like my friend Katie, who just wants the pure experience of the film. I want to understand what the director wanted me to feel, and I want to feel that. And the make-believe artist, thinking about your niece who likes to sort of suspend disbelief and pretend she's a Hanna-Barbera character all day long, or dress up like a princess. And a facilitator. This is someone who's maybe going to the movies to take their niece, or to take their elderly mother, or maybe somebody taking somebody on a date. It's not like they're going to see the movie, they're going because of this other person. So does anybody sort of see where they fit in this? I see a few nodding heads. Raise your hand if you don't see a place that you fit. I've got a few. Can you belong to multiple categories? See, yeah, can you belong to multiple categories? See, when I shopped this around, I was getting a lot of confusion. People are like, wait, I'm here and I'm here. And I'm kind of like, sort of halfway, and maybe a little bit of something you didn't even explain. So I'm like, my little hypotheses that I came up with based on talking to a bunch of moviegoers are wrong. I'm going to fix them for my hypothesis. And then I'm going to go out and talk to people. So what I did was I started thinking about all the things that I had heard, and they fell into 3 categories. Story, people were interested in a story, or not, just passing interest to like really, really excited and wanted to make that story a part of their life. The craft, they were either not aware that these are actors on the screen at all, or they were hyper aware and just like critiqued everything and knew when Act 1 finished and Act 2 was beginning and all of that sort of thing, or somewhere in between. And companionship, that was the other thing people would always talk about. It's like, well, I'm interacting with people around me about this movie, or I'm not interacting with these people, or I'm just facilitating. I changed it to enabler here. Banging on the pipes. Anyway, so when I looked at all of this, I'm like, well, wait a minute, now I've got 60 permutations, 60 different ways of combining this. So I talked to my faux client, and they're all like, well, we're only interested in people who go to movies socially. So I don't want to look at or study the people who go alone necessarily, or the people who are in enablers. That was just their business decision. I asked them why, and they said it was because they get more money than the people who are going socially in one respect or another. And then in terms of the craft, they wanted to explore people who are both in appreciation or aficionado mode. So appreciation is kind of a low aficionado mode. They're both aware of, like there's choreography going on. And yes, okay, beautiful choreography. So that was kind of the difference. And then they also wanted to talk to people who enjoyed the story or were totally excited about the story. So it was kind of like these 4 groups came out of it. We have the enjoyment appreciation social, we have the excitement appreciation social, then we have the enjoyment aficionado social, and the excitement aficionado social. And those were the 4 groups that I went out and talked to, and then did some modeling on. So I want to talk a little bit about talking to people. I tend to do non-directed interviews. And one of the things that I'm becoming more and more aware of is a lot of the traditional marketing that goes on. Hang on a sec. Do you want to, I think he's got it. Pass it back while I'm talking. A lot of the traditional marketing that goes on tends to be observational. They tend to like stand here and watch people do things and not interfere, or maybe film them and then ask their other experts, well, what's going on here? What I tend to do is really touch that person. I do interfere with that person. I want to get under the skin and understand why they're doing these things and what's motivating them. And half the time, like I'll get somebody up at the front of the room and start interviewing them about movies, and they'll go off in this philosophical direction about why they see certain movies and how they do it that they hadn't ever enunciated to anyone before. So it's kind of like a psychoanalytical exploration. You had a question?
I can ask it later because it's dealing with the previous slide. So it's
okay,
you can go with the flow.
Okay, all right. Sure enough. Okay, so talking to people. One of the things that I get a question about a lot is, well, isn't face-to-face being in their world better than talking to somebody on the telephone? And the answer is yes, of course it's better to be in their world, but reality rears its ugly head. You've got to do this in 1 week, and you need to talk to people across the nation or across the globe. How are you going to do that? You can't really, certainly not in a cost-effective way, or a way that's going to give you enough time to sleep at night. So what I do is I'll do face-to-face in certain circumstances. Oh, certainly when people are close to me, proximity-wise, but I'll also do it when they have invented or created their own little artifacts that they use to help them get something done. So when I'm talking to them and recruiting them, I'll try to find out whether they have some sort of a unique method or a unique tool that they've created, and I'll then want to go and be in front of them. If they haven't, and it's all stuff that is very explainable about their head process, the way that the mental process that they go through, then I'll talk to them on the phone. So that's how I do that. The interview itself, after years of doing these sort of things, I came up with some guidelines, some rules that help people conduct interviews. And it's not at all like listening to Terry Gross on NPR. It's not at all like listening to somebody who's doing talk show hosting, where they have an agenda. Their agenda is to entertain their audience. And so the person that they're interviewing, they're going to guide that conversation into areas that's going to be entertaining, that's going to be, reveal something new that's never been said before, or something shocking or controversial or something like that. In our case, we want to do the opposite. We kind of want to let that person do all of the talking and guide where the conversation goes, so that we can see where the way that they think, the pattern in which they think. I don't want to apply any of my own mental structures to what they are going to tell me. And this is a skill. This is a listening skill. Kevin Brooks is another author for Rosenfeld Media. He's a storyteller at Motorola, and he teaches people how to listen. And one of the things that he says is most people, when having a conversation with somebody, are thinking about what they want to say and when they can interject it into the conversation, more so than they are actually listening to what the other person is saying. So what you want to do is listen. First one is you want to follow up on behaviors and beliefs, but don't necessarily follow up on preferences. Oh, I love this. Oh, I hate it when I have to blah, blah, blah. Well, you'll want to find out why. Why is it that you hate it? And what's the next step? What are you doing next? But don't necessarily just go and collect preferences. I've worked with some people who have done this for the first time, and it's too much. Like in marketing, they'll apply all that, and they'll just get a whole bunch of preferences. And the interview's ruined. You can't use that data because there's nothing, no meat underneath it. Open questions only, who, what, when, where, and why. Those things that you learned in your journalism class. Don't start it with, well, did you, blah, 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 blah. And there's a couple of great ways of getting around that, like, can you tell me more about that? Or, ooh, could you explain that? Rather than trying to prompt them to say something. The thing is that people will tend to agree and adopt whatever word that you're going to say, which is the next one, no words of your own. They'll be constantly matching their model to your model and saying, oh, well, she understands it that way. I'm going to use her word so that she'll get what I'm trying to say a little bit better. Try this next time you're talking to somebody, like you're buying a sandwich somewhere or something. Sometimes it's not something more complex even, and you'll see that you're constantly adapting to the other person. The other person's constantly adapting to you. So what I try to do is not insert any new vocabulary words until they've been said. Of course, there's an exception to this if you're talking to rocket scientists. You have to insert some vocabulary so they know what level to talk to you at. Follow the conversation. So we've all been to a dinner party, seated at next to somebody we don't know, like maybe a wedding you went to a couple months ago or something. It's like, well, you don't have a set of questions that you ask of that person written on your napkin on your lap. Instead, you just sort of have a conversation with them and find out what they're interested in and, follow up on it. Maybe that person raises chickens and you love raising chickens too, and so you can talk all about that. You find the unique things in the ways that you match, and you let it go with that. There is no set of questions. When I go into an interview, I actually don't have any questions to ask. A, so I don't try to insert words, but B, so that I listen to the conversation. I'm not like enunciating a survey out loud. It's not about the tools. So a lot of us are used to doing research that has to do with fixing a tool that exists. And so we'll focus on the tools. What we want to do with generative research is kind of broaden our horizon and find out sort of the shape of the whole world that person is working in. And so we don't focus in on tools. We kind of go high level there. We don't get into the details of, like when you're checking out at the grocery store, do you swipe your card first and then smile at the checker, or do you smile at the checker and then swipe your card? It doesn't really matter, that level of granularity. And then, of course, immediate experience is always nice to be able to talk to somebody who's done this recently so that they're not trying to remember something, drag it up out of their memory. There's something that I use that I call the hallway test that helps me understand or keep focused on the level of granularity that I want. And that is, what is the person thinking when they're walking down the hallway to go do something? So for example, a person might be walking down the hallway thinking, oh gosh, I've got to tell my friend that I can't go see the movies with her tonight because I've got to finish this report. So she's thinking that, right? I've got to communicate with my friend that I can't go to the movies. She's also feeling a lot of emotion about this deadline and maybe guilt or maybe being upset that she has to stay late to finish this report and not go play. But she's not thinking, oh, I need to, send an email and open up an email and get her name out of the address book or anything. Not that level, higher level, the stuff that she was thinking about when she was walking down the hallway. There are other ways of getting data besides interviews that I want to talk about. Interviews just happen to be the way that I get it most efficiently and most cost effectively. But you can also go through like customer service data or phone calls and emails that you get in. You can go through survey data that marketing has done. You can try to pull things out of like diaries people have written. You might be able to get any sort of thing that has like an essay quality to it is a better source than just like a survey, because people are just checking boxes that are kind of close to what they mean. When I checked in to get this little badge, the very first thing that it asked me was whether I was here for a meeting or as a social visit or for class or something like that. And I'm like, well, none. Oh, no. So you have to click a box. I'll click the one that's closest. This is like a meeting, right? Anyway, so there's other sources of data that you can mine this stuff from. It may not be as in-depth and as rich as somebody's words, but you can use them. So let's talk about how we go through that data. This is a very full-blown analysis that I did. This is from the moviegoer mental model, and I actually recorded all of these calls and then transcribed them, had them transcribed. It isn't necessary to do this, but it's a lot of fun because when you get further down the line and you have a model and you're presenting it to somebody and they're like, well, why is that there? You can actually trace it all the way back to the actual words being spoken. So that's really nice to be able to answer those kinds of, well, what the questions when you're looking at the model by going back to the conversation. Don't have to do this, though. But essentially, everything I've circled here are things that I'm pulling out. These are little behaviors that I've noticed, or little philosophies or beliefs that people have talked about, or sort of, emotional reactions they've had to something. I'm capturing all these things. And what I'm doing, is looking, the problem is that in spoken conversation, we're not very direct. We imply a lot of things. So especially like when you're talking about an emotional reaction to something, nobody ever wants to admit they're having an emotional reaction, especially when you're talking around a sort of a business scope. And so it's implied, or it's said in different words, and it's sort of couched. You're reading between the lines and you're interpreting a lot. This is very interpretive. And sometimes I talk about third-party people, other people doing this sort of thing. You can capture that data too if that person is a member of that same segment that you're studying. But that's what you're looking for when you're pulling those little red things out. And what I do is I actually grab some of the quotes here so that as I trace back, it's a little easier to go and find these things. This is just the idea of the particular participant that was talking. And I label them. I make all sorts of labels for each one of these little tidbits that I pull out. Buy tickets in advance to ensure that I get in. Choose later screening to get good seats. Just sort of little labels that explain things. All of my labels starts with verbs. I think that verbs are really powerful. They're a great way of getting you into that end user's mindset. And first-person verbs, not verbs like with ing, buying tickets. That kind of puts a barrier between you and the actual buy. And then what I do is I take those labels, I take this table and I label it. And I take each one of the labels of those tables and group them together. Right now I've just sort of gotten them into an empty parking lot. But what I'm doing is I'm building up a little 3-layer hierarchy. And I'll show you what I'm doing in the end with a picture. But for example, a little group here might seem to have something in common, so I start putting them together. This group has something in common that I can actually label, watch a film alone. I start building things from the bottom up, from those little tables of quotes up. And it can be quotes from all of your participants, or all of the participants in the blue group, and here's all the participants in the green group. So you can group them up that way and just start labeling them. This is what it looks like in an Excel spreadsheet. I have the little quotes here. I've got the ID of the participant, the label, and then the 3 levels of hierarchy as I'm building it up. And again, the verbs are very prevalent. So I think they're powerful. You can do this with sticky notes. This is from a workshop that I teach. Sometimes sticky notes make things more, because of it's tactile, it's more immediate, and sometimes goes a little faster too if you're trying to make this go, all take place within the course of a week. This is a set of boards that my friend Mary Pionkowski put together so that she could actually carry them in and out of the conference room so that her sticky notes could be preserved. And she's starting to group them into layers there. So this is the visual of what I come up with, and it's got 3 layers to it. Let's look at the top part. Those little white boxes are those tables that contain the beliefs, that contain the behaviors, that contain the emotions. They're labeled with the little, you can't see it, but they're labeled with the little verbs. They're organized into affinity groups, which some people call towers because they look like little towers. And then those are organized into bigger groups, which are called mental spaces. They're like different head spaces. If you were working on a project and you kind of came to a brick wall or you were tired of it, you go check your email. That's a different headspace than it was when you were working on the project itself. And so that's all that is. Below the line is where it gets interesting. What I start doing is applying all the ways that our current solutions support the things that are going on in this tower. So in the area that's circled right now, you see a lot of support for that one tower, which is in the choose a time moviegoer mental space. And the purple things are really strong supports. These things really help somebody choose a time. But the white things are sort of, it might also help support something here. And so once you know that, you can look across the rest of the bottom of the model and see where there's not very much purple or no boxes at all. Does this mean that this is an opportunity for us to do a better job? Or does this mean that, like my client in San Diego, oh, we don't really want to get into that business at all. Let's just not bother to support that because it's somebody else's job. Here's an example. A lot of these models come up with a little mental space about managing my time, because a lot of us have a hard time getting all the stuff we need to do into 1 week. And yet most businesses who are studying this don't want to get into the area of helping someone manage their time. That's for time tracking companies to do. So there are a lot of definitions for the word mental model out there. One of them is it's a mental representation of how something works. There's another definition, the model a person makes about the workflow of a software solution. And I think that could be extended to the model a person makes to any sort of a thing, not just software-based. Cognitive scientists have this definition. It's a conceptual representation used to help a person understand and interact with a certain part of the world. And so what our models are is all of this. They're not interacting with just one particular product or one particular software application, but the world, the environment in which they're trying to accomplish something. So I'm calling it kind of the underlying reasons that drive people's behavior. And then the bottom part of the model is showing you all the ways that you, as an organization, can support these people doing these things. So let's get back to the hypothesis. We had hypothesized these audience segments. Now that we've gone through and talked to them and analyzed what they were saying, we have a much better idea how close we were when we started out and how we need to maybe adjust them. I've got a couple of examples. This is for Sybase. They sell enterprise solutions for keeping track of huge reams of data and accessing it from all over the place. And in the beginning, we thought, well, hey, we've got one group that doesn't own our product. We've got one group that owns our product but wants more. We've got another group that owns our product and needs help with it. And we've got another group that we decided were the thought leaders. These were the people that Sybase was particularly interested in talking to because they might be the new market, or they might be the canary in the coal mine that helps the rest of the organization buy into the Sybase products. But after talking to all these people, none of this was true. What we found was that there were basically 3 roles in the world of enterprise data management. One is the evaluator, the person who's figuring out what kind of solution might work. Another one's the implementer. That's the person who's like, okay, you made the decision, I'm just going to make it work and get it installed. And then there's the maintainer who's making it work over the lifetime, care and feeding, patches, updates, all of that sort of thing. And most often, each person that we talked to wore 2 of these hats, either the evaluator, implementer, or the implementer maintainer. So it was interesting that we came out with these kinds of models. This is for an online dating site called Engage, and we started out with some hypotheses about people who were dating and people who were helping their friends find dates. So our first one was the social connector. And the next one was somebody who's kind of a will participate if asked. Then we had someone who was self-conscious. You can sort of imagine that. We had the Good Samaritan, This one was new to me, but everybody at that company insisted these people existed. And there was somebody who was called Expand the Possibilities. This was just somebody trying to put more fish into the pond. Any kind of fish. I have better chances. And what we ended up with after all of our analysis was something very different. The first one and the Good Samaritan sort of combined to be the get on the love train people. These are the people who believe love is everywhere, everybody deserves love, and it's going to happen for you. Will participate if asked sort of remained the same, but we renamed it to the words that those people use, which is, I'm going to see what happens. So it was kind of like, I'm not really reaching out, but I'll play along and see what happens. The self-conscious, they divided out into two different groups. There were the people who were trying too hard, and there were the people who really thought it through. There were people who were very careful about every single step and every single decision that they made in the dating process. So that was what we ended up with. It was a big change from what we started with. I want to talk a little bit about the models. So here's a little mental model. Models can represent multiple segments if there's enough overlap. And here we've got a lot of overlap between Wanda and the blue guy. Or if there's not much overlap, you might want to separate them into separate models so that you can keep your ideas around those models separate. You may also end up with completely separate applications for them. Remember the yellow group in the very beginning, and we were thinking, well, maybe they needed some financial counselors, some like human in the loop to sort of help them through this. So that might mean a completely different solution other than what you're offering right now. So the last thing I want to talk about, and there's no clock in this room. How sad. Oh yeah, like I can see that. Good. The last thing I want to talk about is figuring out how to read like the comparison between the top and the bottom of these models. So there's pretty easy. You can look for blank spaces to fill. You can look for scarce or weak support, a lot of white boxes, or like maybe one or two boxes, but it's just not supporting everything that's in the tower above it. The thing to note about the towers, too, is that they may not contain everything, all of the boxes. Those towers above the line, you might 2 years later decide to add a couple of boxes or sort of mentally extend it because you just didn't talk to 64 people. You only talked to 24 people, and you didn't get absolutely everything that could be in there. But you've got all of those towers. You could redefine and augment something that already exists. You could look for surprises. Every mental model has some sort of a surprise. Usually it's kind of a, I knew that, but now my face is being pushed into it, kind of a surprise. It's kind of a low-grade surprise. But I'm going to show you a bigger surprise later. The combine related behaviors and features talks about looking at different parts, different mental spaces, different parts of the model, and seeing if there's synergies between the two. Is there any way that we can marry these things together or support people doing 2 or 3 of these things at once? This next one, look for emotions, is really important. Oftentimes when we're in a business organization, we think emotions have been left behind, yet they're a big indicator of when something isn't working super well, usually, because you usually get negative emotions. And then look at mental spaces that you might have crossed out in your mind. For example, with the moviegoers, we kind of crossed out the whole mental space of going into the theater and watching the movie because we thought, well, they're not going to be able to interact with our website during the movie, right? But there were a couple of things in that mental space that we thought, wait a minute. There was one that was compare the book to the movie to see how well the book to movie translation went. And the other one was look for like little Easter eggs, look for references to other movies and little in-jokes and things. And so we thought of ways of telling people these things ahead of time so that when they got into the theater, they knew what they were looking for, and we kind of enhanced their experience in that mental space. And this last one, rethink features that don't match something above the line. This could be the next killer app. This could be something that you've got an idea for that nobody is thinking of right now. It's just not in their way of accomplishing something. But most usually it's when somebody wants the stock ticker on the homepage, and nobody's going to the homepage to look for stock numbers, stock information. So let's talk a little bit about surprises. This is the online dating site Engage. And during their model, during the research, we found pretty much the reasons why online dating doesn't work really well. And one of the first indicators was in an early mental space. It's called Find Out How to Handle an Attraction. This is the very beginning, where you're either suddenly aware that somebody's maybe interested in you, or you're feeling interested in somebody, and you have to decide whether you're going to act on it or react to it or what. And what we were finding were a lot of words in here that meant that people were physically present with one another. They were co-located, which is impossible to represent online. So this body language, subtle body language, appear disinterested. How do you appear disinterested online? Kind of hard to do. There was another mental space called Get a Better Sense of a Person, which included all of the yak, you're on the phone with this person finding out where they went to college and all this sort of stuff. But it also included a couple of towers that were a little different than that. This is representing somebody who's sort of standing on the sidelines for a little bit. I'm like, I want to find out more about you without letting you know that I'm interested. So I'm going to see how you interact socially with your friends. I'm going to see what your friends have to say about you. And your past interactions and things like that. I kind of want to get an idea. We interviewed 60% female, and so we got a lot of emphasis on maturity. Is this person mature in our data? So I think these towers were representing that. And that's really hard to do online. And then this last one was a mental space called Go Out with the Person for the First Time. And this particular tower was from people who were online dating. We talked to both online and non-online. And this was all of that emotion that you feel when you see the person for the first time. You've already gotten to know them through email or talking on the phone, and then all of a sudden you're in the room with them, and there's shock. This one woman's all like, hey, you looked all nice in your photo, and you've got like, an afro and tattoos. This is not what I expected. So that's a problem. So these were the three problems that we found with online dating, and we set off to try to solve them. The first one was the idea of getting people co-located for that figure out how to handle an attraction thing. So you could maybe post a whereabouts. I'm going to be at Borders tonight in the architecture aisle between 8 and 10. Swing on by and see if you can see anything that you like. Maybe you see somebody you like who wasn't online, and strike up a conversation. That's fine. That's the get on the love train kind of approach. Anyway, so that was the idea, was to get people physically co-located. Another one was this observer on the sidelines thing. Let's enable them. When you made an account on Engage, you had to have your friends join as well, at least one friend, so that the friends could write about you and write about social interactions that you've done. And more so you could actually contact those friends without letting the person who owns the account know. So you can actually talk to these people kind of behind her back and say, well, she says she's a social drinker, but is that really true? That kind of thing. So those were some of the ideas that we had around that. And that was all just looking at these gaps in here and the ways that we were and were not supporting people trying to get stuff done in those towers and the stand on the sidelines observer towers and stuff. As we were going through, what we did was we kind of labeled these ideas because we couldn't do all of them at once. You probably have a way of doing this yourselves here. And we assigned priorities in terms of feasibility and importance to the business, importance to the user, all of that sort of stuff, and graphed it so that we could see, well, where are we going to focus first? What do we do next? Kind of get our hands around the whole enormity of all these things that we've suggested. The reason that I put this up here is because a lot of my clients feel very overwhelmed. There are way too many things to get done. And if you come in here with a model, that's just going to give you more things to get done. So I don't want a model at all, which means you're going to lose out on being able to talk to all these people and hear their stories. So I really want people to listen to stories. So the question, this stuff is intuitive, isn't it? I want to show you Stamen Design. You guys, how many people are familiar with Stamen Designs? They're up in the city, San Francisco, a couple people. They take mashups, Google Maps, with big databases. This one in particular is a database of transportation times in London, I think on the tube and on bus, and real estate costs. So for example, imagine you got a job at the Department for Transport and you had to move to London. And you only wanted your commute to be like 30 to 60 minutes, and you had £500,000 to spend on a flat. That's like $1 million. And so you enter these things into the thresholds at the top, and you'd get these little bright spots left, which are the places that you should look for housing. Brilliant, isn't it? It really is. They do some really great job, great things. But what I would argue is that there's more to it. Sure, there's that. The two towers first are about public transit and about housing costs, but there might be other things like schools, like am I going to feel comfortable in a neighborhood? Where's the database that tells you whether you're going to feel comfortable? Is it going to have the amenities that I want? Does it have the kind of coffee shop that I would feel comfortable hanging out in all morning? Or does it have art galleries that open the first Tuesday of every month like I like, that kind of thing? So there's more to it. Of course, that means that you could have like 42 sliders at the top, which doesn't make sense at all. There's another way around that. But anyway, all I'm arguing is to expand the threshold. The whole idea of intuition is that everybody has a different approach. Do things work completely smoothly here and you all agree all the time? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Very nice. I want to work here. Anyway, so the mental model it's an interpretive device, but it embodies neutral data. So it embodies a bunch of quotes from a bunch of people that you've interpreted to represent certain things based on the context of a conversation. If you guys can agree on those interpretations, then it's a lot easier to agree about what to put underneath and where to focus. How to support people. And the other thing that I encounter a lot is that as employees, we are problem solvers. And we walk in the door every morning wanting to solve problems. I mean, this is what's driven us throughout our career, throughout us, it made us choose what we chose to study in school. We want to solve some problems. Yet, that aspect of it, that whole approach, makes us unable to see what real people are trying to get done. So I'll ask people at the beginning of the project, what is the customer going to get out of this? And they'll tell me things like, oh, the customer is going to have higher customer satisfaction. I was like, no, that's not the customer's objective. Their objective is to maybe find the cheapest flight to Maui. Your objective is higher customer satisfaction. There's a difference there. So I want people to be able to sort of drop the baggage of being a problem solver for a couple of hours and take on the role of that end user, of that potential user, be able to play their role if you had a body swap, know enough about what they're doing. And this leads me to the idea of stories. Stories have been with us for years, millennia. We start reading stories at a really young age. And we know the power, the educational power of it. You read a story or you hear a story and you can empathize with the person. You understand what their circumstances are. And when you understand their life, you can support them better. And there's no reason why we should drop this really important, proven concept the minute we walk into a business. Let's hear stories. So I wanted to show you the Google one. How many people have seen the mental model that Jeff Veen made for analytics here at Google? Couple. Okay, excellent. Well, for the rest of you, here it is. I'm going to, because it's too long to actually fit on the screen and be readable, the first mental space is understand my visitors. Then we've got analyze incoming traffic sources, evaluate site content and performance, and then the last one is communicate findings. And I really liked that last one. So I'm going to dive into that. That last one about communicating findings consists of some certain towers, format reports outside of tool, okay, yeah. Share numbers across the organization, that's important. So everybody knows, where are we standing. It's kind of like that vision, it'll help that vision. Explain what the numbers mean. That's a key one. I think that might have been something that wasn't on everybody's mind when they were creating analytics. And then justify spending on web efforts, which goes without saying. And so the dotted line things were ideas that the team came up with. The solid line thing was the only thing that existed in the version of analytics that they had when they were doing this. And that was for explaining what the numbers meant. You could oh, here, you can have the password and go look at the numbers for yourself. That's going to help. Anyway, and this is, you've probably all seen this. This is some of the vision that's come out of this by being able to look at the stories that people are telling you about what they have to do within their own organization with regard to how well things are tracking on the website. They need to be able to see things in a much better, clearer fashion. So last thing I want to mention is this doesn't have to be really formal. There's a rough sketch way of doing it. This is me in 1998 with my cup of tea and my laptop. And I was at Organic. We were studying time tracking, and I went and talked to all these guys, and they yacked at me. And after, I think about 2-3 days, I just pulled together a little model of what they did. Another example, I do a lot of running, and friends of mine were all training for marathons, and so I asked them, well, what are you doing in your training? So just talking while we're out there running, and then I came home and scribbled it down, and in an hour I built this after about 6 months worth of listening to people. Get the right workout for this training run, monitor how I'm feeling, keep myself fueled, record my run, make my shoes and clothes comfortable, enjoy the trails, and entertain my brain. And what I did with this, because I have an ulterior motive, is I actually plotted underneath those towers the functions on my heart rate monitor. It has like a stopwatch and a countdown and heart rate mins and maxes and alarms and stuff. And then I went through and I found some emotion. This is what people were saying, was that they were frustrated because they'd turn off their stopwatch when they were trying to get, I'm going to run N minutes for my workout. I'm going to make sure I do the right workout. I'm stopping my stopwatch to, get a drink of water or go to the restroom or something, and I forget to turn it back on again when I start. And then I'm down the trail or whatever, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, God, how long have I been running since I stopped? Have I done my workout already? Should I turn around and go home, or should I keep going? It's really frustrating when they're trying to get exactly the right workout. So I came up with a couple of ideas. What if you had an ascending tone, just turn on the stopwatch, and a descending tone to turn it off? What if you had a little LED that was lit up when you actually had it on, so that it would be easier to see that it was on as opposed to looking at the seconds go by? So that was just a rough sketch. I want to conclude with just sort of a page full of mental models. Gives you the stories, gives you the ability to empathize, the ability to kind of drop out of your problem-solving mode for a little bit and understand people, and then enter it again with all the things that are matched at the bottom, and then hopefully this will get more tails in the right place on the donkey. So I've written a book about this that goes into more munchy details about how to get a model together. And I have a couple of those books here, actually. I was going to give one away. Where did I put that box? I was going to give one away to the first person who really wanted one. So raise your hand. There we go. Excellent. And I also have a mental model here that I'll unroll if you want to come up and take a look at it. And it's from an actual client, Dow Corning, so I can't... You're welcome. Thank you. So I can't leave it, but you guys can come up and take a look. And I've got a blog up there, and that's my email address. Thanks very much for your time today.